pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1850 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, we're going to talk about the POWs and MIAs still on the books for this country. According to the POW-MIA accounting agency, this country still has 81,900 MIAs. They say most on that list come from World War II, primarily because of all the shipping that was sunk during that war on the high seas out there by the German U-boats in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and the Japanese Zeros out in the Pacific. The bodies of many of those sailors were never recovered because they went down with their ships thousands of feet underwater. There are still 1,586 military personnel listed as missing from the Vietnam War. Because this is the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast, an MIA from that war will be featured on this podcast episode. A while back, Congress did something pretty nice for the MIAs and POWs. They set up something known as POW-MIA Memorial Day to be celebrated henceforth on the third Friday of every September. This year, the POW-MIA Memorial Day fell on September the 18th. I'm going to share with you a story about how they celebrated that day in Ipwich, Massachusetts. It's always sad talking about these things. It's bad enough when you lose a loved one in a war like Vietnam. The lives of those families are forever changed. That's what makes that Vietnam War Memorial Wall up in Washington, D.C. so dramatic. When you walk along that descending walkway, looking at those 58,276 names etched upon that black marble wall, it shakes you when you realize that every one of those names represents a family whose lives were forever changed. You never get over something like that. What makes that even worse is when one of those loved ones were declared a POW or an MIA. Those Gold Star families never have closure because, in most cases, the remains of their loved one has not been recovered. So they can't have a defining moment like a funeral where you can officially remember your lost loved one. Up in Ipwich, Massachusetts, they had a ceremony I'm going to tell you about, and it's gut-wrenching, so be prepared. There are two stories that appeared in the Ipswich Local news I'm going to share with you that will illustrate the whole situation. First of all, I'd like to tell you about Arthur Hans Hardy. He was an Air Force pilot in the Vietnam War. He was flying an OV-10 observation aircraft when he was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's when the good news, bad news begins. Witnesses saw his parachute deploy. Then he was seen walking down a road. That was the good news. The bad news is that road was a part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and there were large numbers of NVA troops nearby. After that, Arthur Hardy was never seen again. The first story from the Ipswich Local news I'm going to share with you talks about young Arthur Hardy. He was born in Marburg-Land, West Germany, on November the 7th, 1948, the son of Gordon E. and Inger Hardy of Highland Avenue, Ipswich. He graduated from Ipwich High School in 1966, lettering in football, basketball, and track. As a student, Bo Hardy was well liked, is said to have demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility and made straight A's. He graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1970. After receiving his pilot's wings at Vance Air Force Base, Hardy was assigned to the 20th Tactical Air Support Squadron at Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam. Lieutenant Hardy was the pilot of an OV-10A known as the Bronco, which was used for ground support and anti-guerrilla missions, meaning he was a FAC. On one of his forward air control missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos on March the 14th, 1972, Hardy's aircraft was hit and he bailed out of the aircraft in close proximity to enemy troops. He radioed to rescuers that he was going down routes 23 and 233. Although he was believed to be uninjured and his parachute was seen on the trail, search and rescue never found Arthur H. Hardy, and whether he was captured by the enemy is unknown. His status was changed from POW to MIA in November of 1973. Hardy was promoted to the rank of captain during the period he was maintained as missing, and he was awarded the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, a Purple Heart, and others. Captain Hardy's remains were recovered and returned by a Lao citizen on September the 30th, 1983. Captain Hardy's body at last returned to Massachusetts, and he was buried at Highland Cemetery in November of 1983. There you have the story of Captain Mark Hardy. On September the 18th of the year 2020, they had a ceremony remembering Mark Hardy and others. There was a story about this event in the local paper titled POW-MIA Day Marked. The story was submitted by John P. Muldoon. I'm going to share that story with you so you can hear what people are doing to remember our POWs and MIAs. Dateline, Ipwich, Massachusetts. A small group has laid daisies at the grave of an Air Force pilot who disappeared in the Vietnam War. Gordon Hardy, who is in his 90s, went to his son's grave in Cowles Memorial Cemetery with Frank Lindquist, Jim Graffam, and Jim Hertz to mark POW-MIA Memorial Day on Friday, September the 18th, 2020. Marked on September the 18th this year, the day remembers prisoners of war and the missing in action. Lindquist and Graffam are commanders of the VFW and American Legion Post, respectively. Jim Kurtz wrote a book about his father, who was shot down over Austria and taken prisoner by the Nazis during World War II. Arthur Bo Hardy was a U.S. Air Force lieutenant when he was shot down while on a forward air control mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos on March the 14th, 1972. He parachuted from his OV-10A and was observed by other Air Force personnel landing safely and walking along a road. That was the last time he was seen alive. Back during the Vietnam War, the lifespan of an American pilot walking down a road in the vicinity of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos was extremely short. I would say he was quickly picked up by the NVA and dispensed with immediately, because he had probably been calling in fire on their position. Here's the part that restores a little faith in humanity. In 1983, a Laotian citizen located and turned over human remains that were eventually identified as those of Captain Hardy, the Defense POW/MIA accounting agency said. In November of 1983, he was buried at the Cowles Cemetery according to historic Ipwich. Captain Hardy's father, Gordon, said he used to visit his son's grave every day, but now has trouble walking up the incline to pay his respects. I know exactly how Gordon feels. I lost a child a few years ago. She was buried in a cemetery here in Lake Placid. I go out to her grave site every day. I can understand fully why Gordon does his best to go and visit his son's grave every time he can. Continuing with the story. More than 81,900 Americans remain missing from World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the Gulf Wars, and other conflicts, according to the federal DPAA. Almost half are presumed lost at sea, the agency said. That more than likely is due to the aforementioned U-boats sinking American ships. Also, there were many American ships that were sunk in the Pacific by the Japanese Zeros and other assorted aircraft with the rising sun symbol painted on them. World War II still accounts for the largest portion of the missing in action at 72,579, according to the DPAA. As mentioned earlier, there are still 1,586 service personnel listed as missing in action from the Vietnam War. There are 39 from the great state of Massachusetts on that list. Daisies are the flowers associated with POW-MIA Memorial Day in the same way poppies have come to represent Veterans Day. That's some good information to know. Next year, when you conduct your POW-MIA Memorial Day activities, which I'm sure you will, make sure you use daisies. Those are the flowers that go with that particular day. Now you know how they celebrated POW-MIA Memorial Day in Ipwich, Massachusetts. It's always a sad thing, but it's something we must do. I encourage you to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Check out episode 1850. There you will see a picture of the gentleman who went to the cemetery to remember a former MIA. There will also be a picture there of young Arthur Hardy when he was a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy. When you see this fine-looking young man who was cut down so early in his life, it'll break your heart. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1850 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these presentations. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.